Hey guys, how you doing today? Um, got a day off, enjoying it. Slept in nicely. Beautiful to do. Recover from sort of the capitalist disaster we're all experiencing. Right? Take a moment, breathe. Uh, gonna go see some friends today. It's gonna be lovely. I hope you're having a similar sort of experience. Hope things are going nicely for you. Um, I think the thing I really want to talk about today is there's going to be an emerging narrative, and I shouldn't say it's an emerging narrative because it's always kind of been there, but it's definitely going to become more prominent. Certainly going to be an election issue. Should the Liberals actually do as they sound like they're promising to do, which is pass basic income style projects, and ultimately increase the government deficit. And it's the deficit that I really want to talk about because there's a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation about what the deficit is, what it represents, how it functions in the society. And a lot of this comes from my research on modern monetary theory, right? Modern monetary theory is relatively a new field of pursuit, but anytime I've looked into it, it starts at rational positions, right? You study classical economics, and classical economics doesn't really get into definitions of what an economy is and how it functions. It doesn't really get into conversations about what money is and how it functions. Modern monetary theory, on the other hand, makes extremely clear definitions about what money is, how it operates, and what an economy is and how it operates. And so I feel like it's got a firmer root in what is real and less of a theoretical perspective and more of a reality-based and evidence-based perspective. So I have enjoyed my research in modern monetary theory, because it fundamentally accepts that first and foremost, money is something we print. Like, it's something we invented. We created money out of nothing. It's not a commodity in the same way that, like, gold is a commodity, right? It's not a material. Oh, got a little bee friend zipping about me. That's okay. I used to be a beekeeper. Everything's fine. The money is it's a technology, or it's something that humans invented or use. It's more akin to writing than it is to a commodity. But we exist in a society that believes it's a commodity. It's something to be hoarded. It's something to be held close, when it isn't that. We also have been duped into buying all kinds of ridiculous narratives about money and about how it exists. Like, money has always been printed by state organizations. It's something that comes out of governments. That the government prints money. It just pulls it out of the air. It's not. It literally is something that you can just write down on a piece of paper. This organization now has this amount of money. And because we live in a digital age, we can just punch a couple of numbers into a screen, and whoever we want to have money will have it. And so what this means is, like, the government can't ever go bankrupt. Like, and there's this odd thing that goes around that we're supposed to treat the government as if it's a business. I've never seen a business that could print its own money. And governments can't fire their citizens. Like, running government as if it's a business is cruel, sociopathic, malicious is the word that I would use. Because when you get into government and you're thinking you're going to run it like a business, well, that means that you're going to abandon large segments of the population, because that's how you quote-unquote fire them. And your solution to them is go get a job. Like the way Doug Ford said that people with disabilities should just go get a job as he cut their aid. Sociopaths generally treat government like business because it's a way that they can justify maximizing the harm that they do into the society, right? If you can dupe or convince a large enough segment of the populace that the government should act in a way that it is not, which is a business, then you can get away with all kinds of malicious behavior. You can get away with hurting people and deriving pleasure from that, as sociopaths do, and as the Conservative Party obviously does. So the government prints money and just distributes it into whatever it wants. This does create what's called a deficit, okay? Now, because we've been duped into believing that the government is a business, there's this belief that the deficit must be paid down, and that, eventually someone will have to pay this down, and eventually someone will have to pay this deficit, or else there'll be consequences. Nope. Governments are not businesses. They are governments. They do not operate as businesses operate. When a government prints money and puts it into the society, it creates a deficit on the public sector side, but it creates a surplus on the private sector side, right? Like, if I, the government, print money, like $100, let's say, and I hand it to you, right, who is not the government, you are you, you have $100. So that's $100 surplus for you. Whereas the government has a $100 deficit, which is just a method for the government to track how much it has spent in the private sector. That's all it is. It's not a debt the way we think of debt. It's not a loan the way we think of loans. It's just a method by which we track the decisions the government has made, right? It's more akin to a tracking device or a tracking system than it is like a loan or any of that kind of thing. And the same can be true of debt in when governments, quote unquote, go into debt. They're just taking loans. They're creating treasuries for themselves, and private sector people buy those treasuries, right? And so if you wanted to eliminate government debt, you would be eliminating all your treasuries, right? No one would believe it. No one would believe that's a good thing to do. And again, it's just a tracking system. It's just a method by which we see, okay, what decisions have the government made? And so we can hold on to those decisions through time. We write them down, right? We account for them. But it's not a debt. It's not like Bill lent Joe $50 and expects $55. But like, that's not how it works. That's not how the government works. The government prints $1 million and distributes it to whoever it wants to, because it's the government, and they write it down, and the story's over. Like, that's it. If the government wants to reclaim that money, it can through taxation, right? Taxation, which always needs to exist in any monetary system, or else the currency lacks value. You need to create a scarcity, or else your money doesn't actually have value. So and it's at this point I do want to stop and say, like, I am not an expert at modern monetary theory, and I want to make that very clear. But I've read enough, and I've seen enough, and I've listened to enough people to have a pretty decent grasp on it. But if you feel like you're listening to something and you're thinking, I don't think John quite has that correct, you might be right, honestly. I do think that there are details that I need to spruce up on. And always researching, always learning, and that's always great. I just wanted to make that clear at this point, because I never want to pretend like I'm an authority. I'm just a guy who works at a toy store, who kind of has an interest in politics and has an interest in economics and the human spirit. And So anyway, with that disclaimer intact, what it means though is that like the government can literally print as much money as it wants. Of course, if you print a ton of money, it creates inflation, just as if you tax away a bunch of money, it creates deflation, right? Like that's pretty straightforward. If there's more money in the system, it devalues the total value of an individual dollar, right? Like that makes sense. But if the government what governments have been doing for the last 40 years is they've been printing money and handing it to corporations with this trickle-down idea, right? That the corporations will structure themselves and then that wealth will turn around and structure and trickle down into the society, and it's a total fraud. It's a total farce, and we're getting to a point now where it's becoming more and more obvious that even the neoliberals and the fascists who are pushing this ideology forward, that they're trying to go oopsie right now. They're trying to be like, oh, we had an idea and we moved forward and we didn't think it was going to cause so much damage. Oopsie. But it's becoming more and more obvious that these guys were actively duping the populace and are actively attempting to deceive people so that they will sacrifice their lives and sacrifice their own productivity and their own wealth so that people like Jamie Dimon or Donald Trump can just jam money into offshore accounts. People like Jeff Bezos, which is exactly what they do. They take the money that gets printed by the government and they shove it into offshore accounts where it sits worthlessly and does absolutely nothing. And so you have your deficit anyway, but you also have the capital that you printed, like the money that you printed, it doesn't do anything. It's meaningless. It doesn't help anybody. Now, if you print money and you give it to people, well, they spend it, right? That's actually how you build an economy, right? An economy exists if you have someone spending to get a commodity from someone else, right? And then that person spends, and then that person spends. And it's like we've forgotten that in an economy, my spending is your income, right? And that if I don't spend, you don't earn, right? Which means that you can't spend, and so the next guy can't earn. And if you break that cycle by, let's say, jamming all of the money into offshore accounts the way that we've done, you don't actually have an economy, right? You have a system that's kind of collapsing, and the people who have assets, land, buildings, material goods, vehicles, things like this, they end up being the major beneficiaries because they can actually get stuff done. They have assets, they have hard goods, right? Whereas everybody else who doesn't, who's just like renting, all they can do is sell their labor to these people. And so, of course, the capitalist system doesn't want governments to do what they should do in order to dismantle this system, right? Like, the government could print money today. They could print $300 billion today, and they could distribute it to the people. And to pay for that, excuse me, oh my goodness, sneezes caught on film, amazing. Oh, I have like this sunlight thing, right, and the sun just crested over the thing, and a little bit of sunlight hits my eyes, and it's always been this way since I was little. A little bit of sunlight hits my eyes, I sneeze twice. Can't explain it. It's just what it is. I'm sure there's some sort of medical term. I've never actually looked into it that deeply. Anyway, so the government could print $300 billion today, right? That'll create inflation. It will. To avoid that inflation, it should tax away $300 billion from corporations that are sitting on it, right? There's no reason for this money to just be sitting in offshore accounts doing absolutely nothing. It is inert, it is pointless, and so to avoid inflation, you just tax it away. You could do that tomorrow. It would take 15 minutes. It would take no time at all. And it wouldn't be that big a shift, right? The corporations that have hoarded this wealth, they won't miss it because they're currently not using it, right? The billionaire class will feel absolutely no difference in the way that it interacts with the world, right? The billionaires will still be billionaires. There'll be absolutely no fundamental change to their quality of life. They'll still get the best seats in the house. They'll still get to buy the biggest houses, the biggest yachts, all the cars they want, right? They'll get all the toys. The difference, of course, is that the mass of the people won't live in desperation, right? If you pass a basic income and you fund it with money that the government just prints because it can, then everything's totally fine. And these guys that are going to be screaming about the deficit, they don't actually realize that, like, it's not that important. Like, the deficit's not important. It's just a way that the government tracks its spending. That's it. Like, that's literally it. And it doesn't need to, if you create, like, imagine if a government created a surplus, right? That means that it is taxing or taking in more revenue from the populace than it is distributing back out into the populace. And to achieve that, like, Bill Clinton's administration in the United States had a surplus for a little while, and it was during one of the largest collapses during the dot-com crash. And so this surplus was created, sure, and they were able to crow about it because they're illiterate and they don't actually know anything. But it was a devastation to the private sector, right? Because if the government is pulling money out of the private sector, right, it means that the people have less. It's a push and it's a pull, right? I remember listening to this one talk, and it was the lady was talking about modern monetary theory, and she said every time she sees a headline that says deficit skyrockets, she thinks, well, we should say surplus skyrockets, because that's what it's saying. Government debt government deficit skyrockets. Well, private sector surpluses skyrocket, right? That's what the headline should actually say. And you can't. So we're going to enter this period, and it's going to happen soon. And this Aaron O'Toole guy is definitely going to do this. He's just going to keep touting and keep pounding on these absolutely dead philosophies and dead modes of thinking. Well, conservatism itself is a dead ideology, if you ask me. Like, this idea that we should maintain decisions that were made in, like, the 1800s. Like, it cannot actually get more archaic than that. And I genuinely do believe that once a basic income is passed, because I do think the Liberals are actually going to do it. Like, I don't think that they have another card to play at this point. If and once a basic income is passed, the Conservatives can only lose support, right? Their whole shrieking about deficit spending and how the deficit is hurting all people. They said exactly the same thing when healthcare was being passed, right? And what people said then and what people will say now is, like, you know, if the cost of my mom being able to afford her medicine, or my brother being able to afford food and shelter, and my neighbors being able to afford daycare for their kids, or being able to afford some stability in their lives, right? Like, if the cost of that is that some number goes up on a government ledger, I think I'm okay with that. It's always been funny to me that when conservatives call liberals tax and spend liberals, it's like they're saying, yeah, those horrible functioning economy liberals. And then you ask the conservatives, well, okay, how would you run the economy? And their response is, I would decimate the civil society and give all the money to the billionaires. It's like, so feudalism. That's what you're really arguing for. Anyway, guys, I'm out of time. These videos are too short. Like, share, subscribe. I can make longer videos when I get 100,000 subscribers. Let's do it. Good luck out there, guys. Have fun.